I want you to explain to this court, Mr. Vance, why a single piece of steel is costing your company $50,000 a day. The federal judge's voice echoed through the wood-paneled courtroom. Gregory Vance sat at the defense table, sweating through his custom suit, staring at his shoes. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and for 25 years, my life was measured in 10,000ths of an inch. I was the lead tool and die maker at Vanguard Medical Systems in Irvine, California. Stamping medical-grade titanium is not like stamping steel for auto parts. Titanium has a memory. In our shop, we stamp the casing for implantable cardiac pacemakers out of grade 5 medical titanium. The sheets are 0.5 millimeters thick, and the tolerance on the flange is plus or minus 5 microns. Under FDA Regulation 21 CFR Part 820, every single batch of these casings must undergo strict quality system regulations. If a single casing is out of tolerance by even 3 microns, the entire production run is flagged as non-conforming material, and the FDA can seize the inventory. Stamping titanium requires an intense understanding of thermodynamics. When the punch drives into the titanium sheet, the friction heats the progressive die block, which is made of hardened D2 tool steel. As the steel heats up, it expands. Without adjustment, the clearance between the punch and the die block drops from 7 microns to 0. The titanium then cold welded itself to the punch face, causing a catastrophic die crash that shatters the tool. Years ago, Vanguard was a cash-strapped startup. The founder, Harold Vance, could not afford to pay me for the R&D required to build the progressive dies and the calibration software. So, we structured a commercial deal. I built the prototype dies in my home workshop on my own time, using my own Bridgeport mill and wire EDM machine. Because the work was done entirely outside of my employment hours and without using Vanguard equipment, Harold signed a contract that explicitly waived Vanguard's shop rights under U.S. patent law. I registered the patents and the physical dies under my personal entity, Apex Precision Tooling LLC. Apex then leased the equipment and the calibration software to Vanguard for $15,000 a month. The contract stated that the lease was contingent on my active employment as the master tooling supervisor. If I was terminated without cause, the lease would be revoked, and Vanguard would have 48 hours to return the physical dies or face a daily lease holdover fee of $50,000. For 15 years, this arrangement was the backbone of Vanguard's production. But when Harold's health deteriorated, the board brought in his nephew Gregory Vance as the new chief financial officer. Gregory was tasked with preparing Vanguard for a corporate buyout by a larger medical conglomerate. To make Vanguard look attractive to the buyers, Gregory needed to inflate the company's EBITDA by cutting operating costs. Gregory looked at the ledger and saw the $15,000 a month paid to Apex Precision Tooling LLC, alongside my lead machinist's salary. He decided this was a redundancy that could be easily eliminated. On a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I was summoned to the glass-walled conference room on the second floor. Gregory sat at the table with an HR representative, clutching a folder of termination papers. "Arthur," Gregory said, adjusting his cuffs as he looked at his tablet. "We are restructuring the tooling department. Your position is being eliminated, and we are terminating the lease agreement with Apex. The tools are currently bolted to our presses, and they are stamping our products, which makes them company assets. We are offering you a standard severance package, provided you sign this intellectual property waiver." I looked at the paperwork. The waiver was a complete release of all patent rights to the dies and the calibration software. "I will not sign the IP waiver, Gregory," I said. "The physical dies belong to Apex LLC. If you terminate my employment, the lease is revoked. You have 48 hours to return the tooling, or the contractually agreed daily rate of $50,000 kicks in," Gregory scoffed. "We will let our legal department handle that. In the meantime, you are terminated immediately for cause due to insubordination. Security will escort you off the premises." I did not argue. I packed my personal tools into my Kennedy toolbox and rolled it out to my truck. However, I did not touch the Bruderer Press's PLC cabinet. I did not unplug the hardware key containing the calibration software. I knew the law too well to engage in illegal self-help. Instead, I left the key plugged into the machine. But my software was protected by a digital rights management system registered to Apex LLC. The system checked the license validity against an encrypted internal clock. The moment my termination was logged into the system and the 48-hour grace period expired, the software license would automatically deactivate, locking the calibration profiles and reverting the press to its basic factory default settings. I drove home and called my attorney Sarah Jenkins to prepare the formal demand letter. The clock was ticking, and Vanguard had exactly 48 hours to return my property before the commercial liability began. By Tuesday morning, my formal notice of lease revocation had been delivered to Vanguard's corporate headquarters via process server. The contract was clear. Vanguard had until Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to return the physical dies to my possession. Gregory Vance, however, chose to treat the legal notice as an empty bluff. He had already contracted Global Tooling Solutions, a lower-cost manufacturing support firm based out of Monterey, to take over the line. I spent Tuesday in my garage workshop, focusing on the mechanical restoration of a vintage metal planer. In precision machining, you learn to appreciate the patience of old cast iron. It does not warp easily, and it does not rush. I kept my phone on the workbench, waiting for the inevitable call from the shop floor. It came at 7 o'clock that evening. It was Frank, the plant manager, calling from his truck in the parking lot. Frank was a veteran who understood the physical realities of our machinery. "Arthur," Frank said, his voice hushed. "The Monterey crew arrived this morning. Carlos, their lead technician, is a sharp guy. He spent the afternoon running diagnostics on line 3, but the moment he connected his console to the Bruder press, the screen flagged a license expiration warning. It told him the offset calibration software would deactivate tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Did Carlos explain the consequences to Gregory? I asked. He did, Frank sighed. Carlos told Gregory that without your offset matrices, the press would lose the real-time thermal expansion adjustments. He warned him that grade 5 titanium has a massive coefficient of friction and high springback. He told Gregory that once the die reaches 140 degrees, the 7-micron clearance between the punch and the die block would drop to 0, causing the titanium to gall and cold weld to the tool. Carlos flat out refused to run the line without an active software license. He said his company's liability insurance would be voided if they bypassed a system safety lockout. How did Gregory react? Gregory went red, Frank said. He accused Carlos of being in league with you. He told Carlos that he did not hire a global contractor to be lectured on safety tolerances. Gregory said a 300-ton press is just a high-speed hammer and ordered Carlos to program a manual override. When Carlos refused and started packing up his diagnostic gear, Gregory told him their contract was canceled. Carlos and his team walked off the floor an hour ago. So the line is idle? I asked. For now, Frank said. But Gregory is desperate. Medtronic has a delivery window on Thursday morning, and they've already threatened a contract default penalty if we miss it. Gregory is currently on the floor looking for anyone who will run the press. He just offered Bobby, one of our junior night shift operators, double time to run the press on manual override starting tomorrow morning. I gripped the phone tightly. Frank, you need to tell Bobby to stay away from that machine. If that press cycles at 80 strokes a minute without the thermal offset calibration, the progressive die is going to self-destruct. If the safety guards aren't secured, someone is going to get hit with flying tool steel. I tried, Arthur, Frank said. But Bobby is 24, has a young family, and wants the double-time pay. Gregory told him the overrides are standard procedure. On Wednesday morning, the digital clock on my garage wall seemed to move slower than usual. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the 48-hour grace period expired. In the Vanguard facility, the encrypted internal clock on the PLC module reached its limit. The license file deactivated, and the Bruder press's control system reverted to its basic factory default profile. At the plant, Bobby was already running the line under Gregory's direct supervision. They had bypassed the red flashing warning on the control panel. The physics of a die crash are simple but violent. Grade 5 titanium is highly abrasive. As the press cycles, the friction between the titanium sheet and the D2 steel die block generates extreme heat. Under normal operation, my software reads the thermal sensors and adjusts the servo-driven press ram to back off by 3 microns while slowing the feed rate by 2%. This allows the high-pressure lubricant to flow into the clearance gap and cool the metal. Without the software, the press kept driving the ram down to the exact same depth at 80 strokes a minute. Within 15 minutes, the temperature of the die block climbed to 145 degrees. The D2 tool steel expanded. The 7-micron clearance vanished. The titanium sheet, heated by the friction, became sticky and began to gall. At Station 4, where the casing is drawn into its final shape, a fragment of titanium cold welded itself to the punch face. The metal strip could no longer feed through to the next station. The mechanical feeder kept pushing the titanium coil, crumpling the metal strip inside the die. On the next stroke, the press ram came down with 300 tons of force on a double thickness of crumpled titanium and the jammed punch. The sound was described to me later as a metallic explosion that shook the concrete foundation of Bay 4. The hardened D2 steel progressive die block, which had taken me 3 months to machine and heat treat, shattered into 3 pieces. The main die shoe, a 3-inch thick slab of steel, cracked down the middle. The guideposts bent, and the massive crankshaft of the Bruderer press was driven out of alignment, locking up the $1.2 million machine. At 2:15, my phone rang. It was Frank, his voice trembling over the sound of the plant's fire alarms. "It happened, Arthur," Frank said. "The tool is completely destroyed, the press is locked up, and we've got hydraulic fluid spraying across the bay floor. Bobby is okay, but he's shaken up. The Lexan shields caught the shrapnel. Is Gregory there?" I asked. "He's standing by the press, white as a sheet," Frank said. "But that's not the worst of it. The plant quality control manager, knowing we ran without validation and suffered a major machinery failure on a medical line, just filed an official non-conformance report. Under FDA regulations, he had to notify the corporate compliance officer. They've red-flagged our entire inventory of pacemaker casings. Nothing can leave this facility. Gregory just realized he can't fulfill the Medtronic order, and the company is facing a complete production shutdown." I looked at the clock. It was 2:20. Vanguard was now in unlawful possession of my damaged equipment, their line was dead, and the $50,000 daily penalty was officially active. On Thursday morning, my phone rang at precisely 8 o'clock. The caller ID was Vanguard's corporate office. I picked it up, expecting Gregory's voice, and I was not disappointed. Hysteria had replaced his usual corporate arrogance. "Arthur," Gregory shouted, his voice cracking, "you sabotaged our system. You walked out of here and left a digital bomb in our PLC cabinet. We've got a destroyed press, a red-flagged inventory, and Medtronic's legal team is preparing to file for breach of contract. Our attorneys are filing criminal charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You are going to jail for industrial sabotage." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "Gregory, I did not touch your machines. I left the hardware key exactly where it was. The software license expired because you terminated the contract that authorized its use. The DRM lockout is a standard commercial feature disclosed in Section 11 of the software agreement. Your technicians chose to bypass safety limits and run the press without a license. That is not sabotage. That is a self-inflicted disaster. Speak to my lawyer." I hung up. 3 hours later, Sarah Jenkins called to confirm that Vanguard's legal team had filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order in the Orange County Superior Court in Santa Ana. They were seeking a court order to force me to hand over the decryption keys and calibration software, claiming my actions constituted tortious conversion of corporate assets and a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Friday morning was overcast. Sarah and I met at the courthouse and walked into the courtroom of Judge Arthur Martinez. Gregory Vance was already there, flanked by 2 high-priced corporate litigators from a prominent Los Angeles firm. Gregory looked like a man who had spent the last 48 hours drinking stale coffee and reading emergency emails. Vanguard's lead attorney, Richard Sterling, stood at the podium and painted a picture of a disgruntled employee holding a vital medical supply chain hostage. "Your Honor," Sterling argued, gesturing toward Gregory. "The defendant, Arthur Pendleton, designed these calibration matrices during his 25-year tenure at Vanguard. He was paid a salary, and the company paid for the operation. By implementing an automated deactivation protocol that paralyzed our manufacturing line, the defendant violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act by intentionally causing damage to a protected computer system without authorization. Furthermore, the progressive dies are company property. Vanguard has paid over $2.5 million in lease fees over 15 years. That constitutes an installment purchase. The defendant's refusal to provide the calibration files is causing irreparable commercial harm to our company and jeopardizes the supply of life-saving medical devices." Judge Martinez turned his gaze to Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins, what is the defendant's position?" Sarah walked to the podium, opening a blue folder containing the original 2011 contract. Your Honor, Vanguard's counsel is attempting to turn a standard commercial contract dispute into a criminal case, Sarah said. First, under U.S. patent law, my client designed these progressive dies and the calibration software entirely on his own time, using his own equipment, before Vanguard had the capital to fund the R&D. We have submitted the original agreement signed by the founder, Harold Vance, which includes an explicit waiver of Vanguard shop rights. The physical dies and the patents are owned solely by Apex Precision Tooling LLC. Sarah turned a page in her folder. Second, regarding the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, my client did not access Vanguard's computers without authorization. He did not delete files or install malware. The software license contains a standard digital rights management clock that deactivates 48 hours after lease termination. This was explicitly agreed to in Section 11 of the contract. Vanguard voluntarily terminated the lease on Monday morning, thereby initiating the countdown. They had 48 hours to return the dies. Instead, they attempted to run my client's proprietary equipment without a license and without safety protocols, resulting in the destruction of the tool. Judge Martinez leaned forward, looking over his glasses at Sterling. Counsel, did Vanguard have a document showing a transfer of ownership of these patents from Apex LLC to Vanguard? No, Your Honor, Sterling stammered. But we argue that the lease fees paid over 15 years should be interpreted as an equitable purchase of the assets. A lease is not a sale, Counselor, Judge Martinez said, his voice flat. If I lease a Cadillac for 15 years, I do not own the dealership when the lease ends. This contract is clear. The property belongs to Apex LLC, and the software license ended when Mr. Pendleton's employment was terminated. Sterling tried a different angle. Your Honor, the liquidated damages clause of $50,000 a day is an unenforceable penalty under California Civil Code Section 1671. It is disproportionate to the value of the dies, Sarah immediately countered. Your Honor, the $50,000 daily fee is not a penalty. It is a contractually agreed lost opportunity rate. The progressive dies are unique proprietary tools. Because Vanguard has failed to return our equipment, Apex LLC is prevented from leasing these tools to other medical manufacturers, which would generate comparable revenue. Vanguard agreed to this rate in a commercial contract between two corporate entities. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. He looked at Gregory Vance, then back to Sterling. The plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order is denied, Judge Martinez ruled, bringing his gavel down. Vanguard chose to terminate the lease and fire the master toolmaker without reviewing the contract. You cannot now ask this court to rewrite your agreement to save you from your own lack of diligence. Vanguard is in possession of Apex LLC's proprietary equipment without a license. The daily holdover rate is active, and I suggest you resolve this dispute before the financial liability exceeds your company's valuation. We are adjourned. Gregory Vance sat frozen at the plaintiff's table. His legal strategy had collapsed, his manufacturing line was dead, and the $50,000 daily rate was now a court-recognized liability. By Friday afternoon, the courtroom victory had translated into absolute chaos at Vanguard's corporate headquarters. Medtronic's procurement division, having learned of the safety red flag and the court's ruling, issued a formal 24-hour notice of default. Even more critical, the medical conglomerate that was in the process of acquiring Vanguard announced they were halting the acquisition audit. The litigation and the production shutdown threatened to wipe out Vanguard's valuation, turning an $80 million buyout into a bankruptcy risk. I was in my garage, carefully hand-honing the tool steel blade of my metal planer when my phone rang at 4 o'clock. The caller ID did not show the corporate office. It was a direct line from Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach. Arthur, the voice said. It was raspy and slow, but it had the familiar authority of Harold Vance. I just read the court transcript Martinez handed down. I also saw the photos of the ruined Bruderer press on line 3. I should have never let my nephew touch the manufacturing operations. Hello, Harold, I said. I am sorry about the press. Frank tried to warn Gregory, but he would not listen. Gregory is a fool who thought he could run a precision machine shop with spreadsheet formulas, Harold said. The board terminated his contract at 3 o'clock this afternoon. He is out of the company, Arthur. But I have the board of directors in my hospital room, and Medtronic is preparing to pull their contract by Tuesday. If they walk, the acquisition falls through, and Vanguard is finished. What is it going to take to buy out your patents and get the backup line running? I had already aligned on the numbers with Sarah. We knew Vanguard's financial limits, and we knew the exact value of the proprietary technology. Here are the terms, Harold, I said. First, Vanguard pays the 3 days of accumulated holdover penalties for the unauthorized possession of the dies, which is $150,000. Second, you pay my full 25-year severance package, plus 6 months of salary for wrongful termination, totaling $220,000. Harold did not hesitate. Agreed. What about the tooling and the calibration patents? Vanguard buys out the patents, the physical progressive dies, including the damage set, and the calibration offset database from Apex LLC for $1.8 million, I said. In addition, I will contract as an independent consultant for 2 weeks at $250 an hour to supervise the installation of the backup dies on line 2 and train Frank and a junior toolmaker to run the calibration system. I heard Harold speaking to the board members in the background. After a moment, he returned to the line. "It is a steep price for a spreadsheet mistake, Arthur," Harold said with a tired sigh, "but it is fair. You built the technical foundation of this company, and Gregory tried to steal it. The board has approved the terms. The legal counsel is drafting the agreement now, and the wire transfer will clear Monday morning." On Monday morning, I walked back onto the floor of Bay 4. I was not wearing the blue-collar Vanguard shirt. I wore a plain gray flannel, jeans, and my old leather work boots. The atmosphere in the shop had completely changed. The tension was gone, and the machine operators nodded in respect as I passed. Gregory's glass-walled office upstairs had already been cleaned out. Frank met me at line 2, where the backup 200-ton Bruderer press was prepped and clean. I took the black metal hardware key from my pocket and plugged it into the PLC cabinet. I connected my laptop, loaded the backup calibration files, and checked the temperature readings from the sensors inside the backup die block. "Are we ready, Arthur?" Frank asked, his hand hovering over the green start button. "Cycle it once on manual feed," I said. Watching the digital clearance readouts, the press ram descended, the punch entering the die block with a clean, silent clearance of 7 microns. The sensor registered the ambient temperature of 74 degrees. "Run it," I said. Frank pressed the button. The feeder gripped the titanium strip, and the press began its rhythmic cycle. Thump, thump, thump. Within 10 minutes, the speed reached 80 strokes a minute. On the diagnostic monitor, I watched the calibration software automatically adjust the ram stroke, backing off by 2 microns as the D2 steel warmed up and expanded. At the end of the conveyor, the first batch of titanium pacemaker casings began to slide into the collection bin. I picked one up, checking the flange with my micrometer. It was flat to within 3 microns, 0 galling, 0 defects. Over the next 2 weeks, I spent my time training a young machinist named David. He was 28, had a degree in manufacturing technology, and actually wanted to learn the manual craftsmanship of toolmaking rather than just pushing buttons on a CNC console. He respected the tolerances, and he did not wear leather loafers on the concrete floor. On my last day, I packed my diagnostic laptop and shook Frank's hand. "Thanks for saving the company." "Arthur," Frank said. "Keep an eye on the clearances, Frank," I said, "and do not let anyone in a tailored suit near the PLC cabinet." I walked out to my truck, the warm California sun on my face. As I sat in the cab, I pulled up my phone and checked my banking app. The wire transfer of $2,170,000 from Vanguard's corporate escrow had cleared. I drove home, parked in the garage, and walked back to my workbench. The vintage metal planer was waiting for me. I poured a cup of black coffee, sat on my stool, and picked up a piece of cherry wood. The workshop was quiet, smelling of walnut oil and wood shavings. I had spent 25 years fighting for micron-level precision on a corporate floor. Now I was finally working on my own time, and the clearance was perfect.